Okay, hello all, and this is my presentation on Lego-based therapy in adolescents in the southwestern United States. So to start, we need to introduce the context of the study, the problem, and the research goal as a whole. And to start with that, we'll start with the context and the gap. So as the anxiety crisis continues to grow in America and the symptoms begin to increase and begin to worsen, Lego-based therapy has begun to become a more acceptable model for alleviating these symptoms. And it is formatted by a lower structure of interaction with Lego. So basically a person provides Legos to a group of people, and the people build and play with Legos and then reflecting their experiences. And therefore it's a very kind of casual way of executing a therapeutic model. And the research has begun to indicate that this helps to alleviate social anxiety disorder, which is formatted by a sense of fear, self-consciousness, humiliation, and embarrassment with the person involved. It's a sort of stage fright. And this seems to be a problem that is reflected in the research, but instead of focusing on social anxiety disorder, this therapeutic model is being more moved to people with autism spectrum disorders, given that the neurological development, it seems to be more impacted by Lego-based therapy, as we'll see within the literature review. However, this does not mean that the problem of social anxiety disorder goes away, and therefore we need to acknowledge that research needs to be done in this area to understand the effects that this has and whether or not it can be used as a potential therapeutic model for the future. Therefore, the research question for the study will be, can engaging in Lego-based therapy affect the acute symptoms of social anxiety disorder in high school adolescents without autism spectrum disorders in the southwestern United States? So beginning with the literature review, we'll talk about acute versus chronic anxiety, communication as a whole, and Lego as a therapeutic model. So starting off with acute v chronic, acute refers to short-term / physical symptoms with anxiety, and it means panic attacks, stage fright, stress, sweaty palms regarding that. And in terms of social anxiety disorder, this research is very limited, as it's not only is it not on adolescents without ASD, but it also doesn't really consider the short-term symptoms of social anxiety disorder as that fear, that humiliation, and that unwillingness to communicate with others. And therefore, it is a much stronger gap than the chronic time symptoms, which is more long-term and are debilitating, such as depressive episodes and repeated and more potent acute symptoms. And research in this is abundant because as chronic illnesses are much more significant and acute, and therefore deserve more time and investment in terms of researchers. However, that does not mean that acute doesn't go away, therefore the significance of this research. Continuing on with the theme of communication, adolescents with ASD has been a frequently researched topic within this framework of Lego therapy, and it's been abundant, it's been analyzed, and the perceptions of people engaged in have been applied to the field. And it's also been referred to that as a result of the entire engagement, the people involved are actually able to discuss things a lot better. However, adolescents without ASD did not have this uniformity of experience. And in addition to that, entire age gap has been overlooked or will soon be present for the context of a study, given that it was assumed that they'd be able to communicate as a whole and it was considered to be a control variable. However, that does not acknowledge the fact that people might have differences in their ability to communicate, and therefore it's more of a question than an answer. And finally, we want to talk about Lego as a therapeutic model as a whole, and mainly a gap on duration of sessions to figure out the problem compared to the participants. Given that the overall perception of Lego building as a therapeutic model is that it is for recreation. It's not very intentional, and it's not very effective. However, current research is showing that this is the opposite, as it is shown with kids with ASD, a much better and much more profound effect than regular therapy, as it allows them to disassociate from talking and instead reflect their problems through Legos. And however, there's not much research on this effect for kids without ASD, especially in the adolescent era. Therefore, that kind of contributes to the overall gap as a whole. In addition, the duration of session directly applies to whether or not this is a gap, because most sessions are done for chronic illnesses and therefore take an hour or more. This study will use 30 minutes to deal with acute symptoms. And as we referenced that, we'll get into the methodology, procedures for the study, and the data analysis methods. So the methodology for this study is a non-participant observation study, and this is good for observing phenomena in their most holistic nature, given that it allows the researcher to observe trends, patterns, document each one that they observe, and analyze it for later. And this data will be then compiled into field notes as a part of the data set that will be coded later, and consists of visual of the phenomena, the audio at the time occurrence, and patterns involved. The overall procedures will begin with a recruitment form through a Google form, emails, and which will then correspond with consent forms. Then conducting the experiment, the researcher's role will be to provide the Legos and simply conduct field notes and make observations. It's a very low material study, and it just needs to happen 5 days of 30-minute sessions. And then we go to data analysis, and our methodology for that is the Braun and Clark thematic analysis, which includes in assigning codes and team development. As for this coding methodology, it's going to be considered that the 30-minute sessions, each one will have a timestamp of 1 minute, and field notes will be added. A photograph of what's happening at that image, that time period will be added, as well as the transcribed audio, and then assigning the codes as a result of all these 3 sets of data. And then those first and second cycle codes will then be added into a categorical approach to develop themes and refine themes for good results, which we will have here. The first theme that was developed was the theme of collaboration, and within the sub-themes of social interaction and communication, as the participants throughout the 30 minutes were rather shy and did not interact much, and that was a repeated pattern. But as the session developed, they seemed to interact more and develop more stronger Legos and more larger Legos, showing an increased level of engagement and ability to coordinate. The second theme was emotional engagement, and within recreation and fascination, as in the beginning, they were also not very interested in doing anything, kind of just sat around. But as time developed and they actually gave it a shot, not only did it show visual and tacit symptoms of enjoyment, but also rather a deep interest that can only be described as fascination. And then finally, we have solitary play, and that more consists of the varied responses of people when they were building alone compared to whether they're building as a team, and the amount of activity they had compared to people working as a team. With that in mind, we'll get to the discussion. The interpretation of theme 1. If collaboration is a major mitigation of social anxiety disorder in the acute form, given that it involves people working together and overcoming their humiliation and their stage fright and actually present their ideas and coordinate, and therefore is a major sign of these acute symptoms being alleviated. And this matches current literature involved with applying Lego-based therapy as a methodology for lowering symptoms of anxiety, as this theme was reflected in kids with autism working together and helping each other out. And this suggests a more positive link with productive therapy models, as it allows the people to actually have productive results, mitigate their symptoms, and feel better as a whole. However, these implications must be interpreted as a varied model, as this was a one-time study and was rather limited in its data size, given that each session generally had an average of 5 people present, and therefore, even though those phenomena are still valid, they need to be understood as this research can be replicated once more to assure this validity of these results. For the second theme, we have the emotional engagement. The overall improvement in mental disposition is a great sign for this study, and a great sign for Lego therapy as a whole, as that was one of the more resolvements of subtle symptoms like humiliation and embarrassment, where you can't tell exactly by what they're doing, but you can definitely tell by the analysis of their facial reactions and some of the words they say. And this kind of shows up in the recreation theme, as this not only does it match current literature with Lego therapy as well, as shown by the parent study with not only autistic kids, but also with university adults. This kind of allows us to understand that the implications of this match current therapy methods and could be used as a future model. Continuing on, we had fascination, which was a newer finding in literature, because it differentiated from excitement, as more fascination was something that was more subtle. Excitement could be their physical reactions, their cadence speeding up. Fascination was more of intriguement as to what the others were doing. And therefore, it was more of a new finding, as kind of teared in with collaboration. And therefore, this kind of implies that there is a stronger interest with adolescents without ASD, as with the adolescents with ASD, they didn't really have this fascination, they had excitement, as previously stated. And then for theme 3, we have the solo player reaction versus the solo player activity. For the solo player responses, the initial response was uniform in that most people were not very interested and did not do much. However, at the end, some of these people, in fact, joined other teams and began to create things that were a little more interesting and actually became more engaged with the study as a whole. And then for the solo play activity, the initial activity was again rare, as one person on the average of all 5 sessions did not include a kind of progress in building Legos or even participating in the study as a whole. However, at the end of the session, on days 2, 3, and 4, we saw that final activity was now uniform, and that these people had joined the groups and had the ability to communicate and enjoy the study as a whole, which alleviate their symptoms. And that's it.